I want to take you back to a time before the headlines, before the comeback stories, before the applause that made it seem inevitable. There was a moment when Robert Downey Jr. was not a cautionary tale yet. He was still considered a prodigy, a child raised inside film sets, scripts, cameras, and adult conversations. He didn't discover acting, acting discovered him. His father was a filmmaker. His childhood was unconventional, unfiltered, and deeply unstable. By the age when most children are learning structure, he was learning performance. By the age when discipline should be taught, chaos was normalized. And by the age of 6, he was introduced to drugs. Not by the streets, not by bad friends, by his own father. It wasn't framed as danger. It wasn't explained as harm. It was just normal. That moment mattered more than anyone understood at the time. Because addiction doesn't always begin with rebellion. Sometimes it begins with permission. As Robert grew older, the world began to notice his brilliance. He was sharp, quick, magnetic. Casting directors didn't see instability. They saw potential. Studios didn't see warning signs. They saw box office. And early success wrapped his dysfunction in validation. When people applaud you, they don't ask how you're surviving. They just assume you are. By his 20s, he was everywhere. Critically praised, financially comfortable, artistically respected. But internally, the foundation was already cracked. Drugs weren't an escape for him. They were familiar. They felt like home. And when pressure increased, he didn't search for relief. He returned to what he already knew. What followed wasn't a sudden collapse. It was a slow erosion. One missed call time, one late arrival, one excuse that sounded believable enough, until studios began whispering, then worrying, then documenting, and eventually replacing. The first arrest shocked the public, but it didn't shock him, because when you've been rehearsing self-destruction for years, the collapse feels expected. Jail cells replaced trailers, courtrooms replaced premieres, and every time he was released, there was hope. Hope that this time was different, that this incident was enough. But addiction doesn't respect embarrassment. It doesn't fear consequences. It only demands continuation. Robert Downey Jr. became someone studios ensured reluctantly, then not at all. His name stopped opening doors. It closed them. Hollywood didn't turn against him out of cruelty. It turned away out of exhaustion. No one knew how to save him, and eventually no one tried. By the late 1990s, his career was no longer unstable. It was radioactive. Roles disappeared. Friends distanced themselves. Trust evaporated. He wasn't just unemployed. He was unhireable. And the most painful part wasn't losing fame. It was losing credibility. Because when talent fails repeatedly, people stop calling it tragedy. They call it choice. This was rock bottom. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just quiet isolation layered with public disappointment. And that's where the real story begins. Not with redemption, not with resolve, but with exhaustion. Because sometimes the turning point doesn't arrive as motivation. It arrives as total depletion. When even self-destruction feels boring. When chaos no longer numbs. When you finally understand that surviving like this is harder than changing. That realization didn't make him strong. It made him honest. And honesty, for the first time, scared him more than drugs ever had. When losing everything still isn't enough, recovery didn't begin with clarity. It began with confusion. After years of arrests, broken promises, and public apologies that fooled no one, Robert Downey Jr. didn't suddenly wake up transformed. There was no cinematic moment where light flooded the room and purpose returned. There was only fatigue, a kind of tiredness that settles into the bones. The exhaustion of repeating the same destruction and expecting a different outcome. He entered rehabilitation not because he believed it would work, but because there was nowhere else left to go. That distinction matters, because people often assume recovery starts with belief. In truth, it often starts with surrender. And surrender, for someone whose entire identity was built on talent and control, felt humiliating. Inside rehab, fame meant nothing. Charisma didn't earn privileges. Excuses weren't persuasive. He wasn't a gifted actor there. He was just another addict with a long list of rationalizations, and that was unbearable. For the first time, he couldn't perform his way out. No charm, no improvisation, no applause, just accountability. And accountability is terrifying when your past is full of evidence. The early days were not inspirational. They were mechanical. Wake up, attend sessions, listen to stories that sounded disturbingly familiar, admit truths he'd spent decades avoiding. Relapse hovered constantly, not as temptation, but as habit, because addiction doesn't whisper, it remembers. Every cell in his body knew exactly how to fall apart. What changed slowly wasn't his circumstances, it was his tolerance for lying to himself. He began to notice how often he explained his failures using intelligence instead of responsibility. How often he reframed consequences as misunderstandings. How often he blamed the industry for abandoning him rather than acknowledging why they had. That shift wasn't dramatic, it was uncomfortable. And uncomfortable honesty doesn't feel like progress while it's happening. Outside rehab, the world had moved on. Studios didn't wait. Audiences didn't demand his return. There was no public countdown to redemption. He was, for the first time, irrelevant. And irrelevance is brutal for someone who once defined himself through recognition. Money was gone. Relationships were fractured. Trust had a price tag he couldn't afford. When he eventually left treatment, he wasn't welcomed back. He was tolerated at best. Roles came rarely, and when they did, they were small, conditional, and surrounded by legal clauses thicker than scripts. Studios demanded sobriety guarantees. Insurance companies refused coverage. Every opportunity felt like probation, and that pressure didn't inspire confidence. It triggered fear. Fear of failing again. Fear of proving everyone right. Fear that this new version of himself might not be enough. That fear didn't disappear. He learned to carry it, one day at a time. He leaned into structure. Routine replaced chaos. Discipline replaced impulse, not because it felt good, but because it felt safer. He rebuilt trust the slowest way possible, by showing up repeatedly without spectacle. No interviews, no declarations, just consistency. Years passed quietly, and then something unexpected happened. A director gave him a chance, not a lead role, not a career-defining moment, just a role. A contained environment, limited risk, strict oversight. Robert treated it like oxygen, not a comeback, a test. He arrived early, he knew his lines, he stayed focused, nothing went wrong. And in Hollywood, that was news. Another role followed. Then another. Still no celebration, just cautious optimism. People didn't trust the change yet. They were waiting for the relapse. And that waiting never fully stops, because once you burn bridges publicly, even rebuilding them privately doesn't erase the memory. But something inside him had stabilized. Not confidence, commitment. Commitment to boring responsibility, to predictable routines, to choices that didn't make headlines. That commitment slowly altered perception. Not overnight, but undeniably. The industry began to reconsider, not because they believed in redemption stories, but because results were consistent. Then came a role that would alter everything, not because it saved him, but because it tested whether he was truly different. The offer was risky, the expectations enormous, and the stakes were absolute. If he failed this time, there would be no next chapter, only footnotes. This wasn't a return to relevance. It was a final audition for survival, and he knew it. That knowledge sharpened him. Every rehearsal mattered. Every decision carried weight. He wasn't acting to impress. He was acting to prove reliability. And reliability, not brilliance, is what rebuilt his career. This role didn't resurrect his past image. It introduced a new one. A version of Robert Downey Jr. who had been dismantled and reconstructed through discipline rather than ego. But the real transformation was still incomplete, because rebuilding a career is easier than rebuilding an identity. And the next challenge wouldn't come from substances, it would come from success. Because success has a way of testing whether change is real or just situational. And that test was coming faster than anyone expected. When success returns and temptation changes shape. The industry didn't announce his return, it observed it. Robert Downey Jr. wasn't suddenly celebrated, he was monitored. Every new role carried unspoken conditions, every set felt like a test site. And then came Iron Man, not as a gift, as a gamble. Marvel Studios at the time wasn't the empire it would become. They were betting everything on a character that mainstream audiences didn't fully trust, led by an actor whose past terrified insurers. Casting Robert Downey Jr. wasn't a romantic decision. It was calculated risk. He knew that. That awareness changed how he approached the role. Tony Stark wasn't just a character, he was a mirror. Brilliant, arrogant, self-destructive, addicted. But unlike his own past, this character was given the chance to confront consequence and choose responsibility. Robert poured restraint into the performance, not chaos. Precision. Discipline replaced excess, and audiences felt it immediately. The film succeeded beyond expectation, not because of spectacle, because of credibility. Suddenly, Robert Downey Jr. wasn't a liability. He was essential. The irony was brutal. The same traits that once sabotaged him now fueled his comeback, but only because they were controlled. Fame returned, money followed, opportunities multiplied, and with them came a new danger. Not substances, validation. When you've rebuilt yourself from nothing, applause can feel like permission. Permission to relax, permission to drift, permission to believe the work is done. Robert didn't relapse into drugs. He confronted something subtler, ego, the belief that he had outgrown risk, that discipline was now automatic. That recovery was complete. But recovery doesn't end, it evolves. The stakes rose rapidly. Sequels, press tours, contracts spanning years. He was no longer just an actor, he was a franchise. And franchises don't pause for personal reflection. They demand availability, consistency, output. To survive this phase, he did something crucial. He didn't isolate, he anchored himself. He leaned into accountability systems outside of Hollywood, support networks that didn't care about box office numbers, people who measured success in sobriety, not awards. He learned to separate praise from worth, a skill far harder than quitting drugs, because substances destroy you quickly. Adoration dismantles you quietly. As the Marvel Universe expanded, Robert's public image stabilized. He was funny again, confident, charismatic, but underneath he maintained structure obsessively. Routine wasn't optional, it was survival. He avoided environments that invited excess. He guarded his time. He respected boundaries he once mocked. That vigilance wasn't visible on red carpets, but it was constant. Over time, the narrative shifted. He wasn't just a comeback story. He was proof that reliability could coexist with creativity, that discipline didn't dull brilliance, it refined it. His career didn't just recover, it transformed. He became a leader on set, a stabilizing presence, someone younger actors trusted. The industry that once abandoned him now relied on him, and that reversal carried weight, not pride, perspective, because he remembered the silence, the unanswered calls, the contracts withdrawn without explanation. Success didn't erase that memory. It sharpened gratitude, and gratitude kept him grounded. Eventually, Robert Downey Jr. reached a position few ever do. He wasn't chasing roles. Roles chased him. And for the first time, he could choose, not based on desperation, based on alignment. He invested, produced, built influence beyond acting, not to dominate, to stabilize. He had learned that empires don't protect you from collapse. Structure does. And the empire he built wasn't just financial, it was internal. Self-awareness, boundaries, consistency, those were the real assets. Because fame is temporary, talent fluctuates, but structure endures. His story isn't about falling and rising, it's about learning how not to fall again. And that lesson didn't arrive through suffering alone. It arrived through sustained responsibility, day after day, choice after choice. The ending wasn't dramatic, it was stable. And stability, for someone who once lived in chaos, was the greatest achievement of all. People often ask how the story ends. They expect something loud, a speech, a declaration, a moment where the past is finally defeated. But real recovery doesn't end with victory, it ends with maintenance. Robert Downey Jr. didn't defeat addiction. He learned how to live with the awareness of it. That distinction is everything, because believing you've won is usually when you lose again. As his career reached heights that once felt impossible, he became careful about how success was interpreted. He didn't treat it as proof of worth, he treated it as responsibility. Because he knew exactly how fast it could disappear. The empire people talk about, the money, the films, the influence, those were outcomes, not foundations. The foundation was built in quiet rooms, in routines no one filmed, in choices that never made headlines. Choosing to leave events early, choosing rest over exposure, choosing structure over spontaneity. Those choices didn't look heroic, they looked boring, and boring saved his life. What makes his story powerful isn't the scale of his comeback. It's the fact that he didn't romanticize the fall. He never framed addiction as fuel for creativity. He never turned pain into branding. He spoke about it plainly, as damage, as loss, as something that nearly erased him. That honesty mattered, because it disrupted a dangerous myth that suffering is necessary for greatness. His greatness emerged only after suffering stopped being glorified. He rebuilt relationships slowly, apologized without demanding forgiveness, accepted that some bridges would never reopen, and he made peace with that. Not everyone is required to witness your redemption. Some only experience your damage. Accepting that truth is part of growing up. As time passed, his focus shifted outward. Mentorship, production, supporting stories that explored humanity without exploiting chaos. He didn't need to be the center anymore. That alone proved how far he had come. Today, when people reference Robert Downey Jr., they often lead with triumph. But the real lesson sits beneath the headline. He didn't change because success returned. Success returned because he changed. And change didn't happen through motivation. It happened through repetition. Small, unremarkable decisions made consistently. When the spotlight fades, when applause quiets, when identity is stripped down to habits, that's who you are. Robert Downey Jr. became someone who could be trusted. And trust once lost is harder to earn than fame. His story isn't a promise that everything will work out. It's evidence that rebuilding is possible, but only if you stop negotiating with the behaviors that destroyed you. Not tomorrow, not gradually, decisively. The most dangerous moment in life isn't failure, it's believing you're exempt from repeating it. He survived not because he was stronger than addiction, but because he respected it enough to never underestimate it again. And that awareness, that humility, that daily choice to remain grounded, that is the empire he built. One that can't be taken away by scandal, relapse, or time. If you're listening to this and wondering whether it's too late, remember this: rock bottom doesn't care how talented you are, but recovery doesn't care how far you've fallen. It only asks one question: are you willing to live differently, even when no one is watching? That's where the story truly ends, not with applause, but with presence, silence, and the decision to stay.